Well, welcome, Maria, back to Tidal Pull. It's good to have you back at the Weston today. I'd like to begin by having you discuss the genesis of Tidal Pull and how the exhibition came together.
Yeah, I got an email from Lorraine Wibble, who's a former collaborator of mine. We used to run a curatorial collective in Cincinnati for a couple of years called Nearby Curatorial Collective, and she reached out to me in late spring, early summer of 2019 and said, hey, I have a couple of other artists that I am really interested in working together on for a show, and would you be interested in curating it? And because I know Lorraine's work, I was interested immediately, began investigating the other two artists that she wanted to show with, and found myself very curious about what a three-person show at the exhibition space in the Weston could look like.
How did you connect with the three artists in the exhibition?
Knowing Lorraine and her work, I kind of revisited what she had been doing in the past few years, and Lauren Post is an artist who I was familiar with. I'd been teaching at the University of Cincinnati's College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning for the past decade, and didn't realize until we were doing the installation actually that Lauren was a former student of mine. I taught the first art history class she had taken at UC. And but I was familiar with her work because Lorraine had shown her work as a curator in Nearby. And Lauren was in grad school back at DAP when I was teaching there, and so I was somewhat familiar with her work. But Katie Hubble was a brand new artist to me. I had not familiarized myself with her work then. Went down kind of a deep dive into her website and all of the work that she had been doing, and was really interested in working with all three of the artists for that reason.
How did you arrive at the Tidal Pull?
Yeah, we'd had some more tongue-in-cheek titles initially slated for this show. I think the first title we thought was maybe, Is It Even Water If It Doesn't Have Art? A little bit tongue-in-cheek, and then it got even more ironic, kind of leading into the beginning of 2020. We had thought of calling it Life's a Beach and Then You Tide, and along came COVID, and it felt a little too tongue-in-cheek, a little too cynical for the moment, and we were all kind of caught in this period of isolation and not knowing whether or not the show was going to happen, not knowing whether or not any of us would be around after those circumstances were happening at the moment. And so it wasn't until early 2021 that we began kind of revisiting the ideas. Initially, the proposal that I had made to the Weston was for the entire building, upstairs and downstairs. And I think it was a very smart restructuring that felt necessary, a kind of condensing of the ideas that we had been considering, and maybe a more serious take on this iconography of water that these artists were so consistently thinking of. And what I kept connecting it to was these constant natural cycles that are happening in the world around us. The cycle of the moon, and 28 days, being the planet that, or the celestial body that affects us as humans. And using water as this metaphor for our humanity, for our emotions, our ability to really be fluid and flexible in that very precarious COVID moment. And so thinking of the ways in which water can be a metaphor for our more flexible and liminal states that the moon became this kind of presence, pulling that, pushing and pulling on us, on us on this planet. We were experiencing probably the first in my lifetime real global event, something that felt like everybody was in the same place. And so thinking more seriously about the themes that we were talking about, I wanted to talk about almost like a force of nature. And so initially I thought tidal force, but then I thought, well, that sounds a lot like a superhero show, movie or something, some sort of a Marvel comic book. And so I wanted it to feel more serious and profound, and a truth that would feel universal, that people could connect to. And therefore, thinking about the ways in which the moon has this very practical, legitimate, tangible effect upon the waters of this planet. And so, yeah, that's how the name came. That was probably a little long.
No, that was good.
It's okay. All right.
Covered a lot of bases. That's good.
Okay.
Discuss the installation design and layout, and I've kind of put some the use of a darkened environment, kind of the descent from upstairs into darkness as you come to the lower level of the Weston, and then the sequence of the artist's work, which ends with Katie Hubbell's immersive installation in the back gallery, and then finally the connections that I've been finding as I'm living with this show day to day between the three artists in terms of imagery and things that kind of appear throughout as you're moving through the installation.
Yeah, I think conceptually, this is probably the most heavy-handed curatorial show I've been involved in. I often will, particularly for an installation artist, I like to give them a footprint and kind of step away. And I think because there is so much about all of us being so isolated and so kind of in our little worlds that we've created for ourselves, and knowing that that's part of the show, that I really wanted to, speak about the ways in which we are kind of finding points of meaning in our lives, and art being a way through that, art being a kind of catalyst for us to connect to the more profound meanings around us, that not everybody was experiencing the same precarity, that, that just going and doing the simple things that one needed to do, like going to a grocery store, could potentially put oneself's physical, body in jeopardy. And so we're all making these kinds of literal life or death questions. I wanted it to feel like a cycle. I wanted it to feel like, yes, we are in the dark. Yes, we are at this very questioning moment, but that, I'm hoping that the way through is that ultimately, the darkest hour is just before dawn, and that we will come out of it with better priorities, with better values as a society. And so I was thinking conceptually of this as a kind of infinity symbol of the new moon to the waxing, the full, and then the waning. So this kind of constant cycle that we're always involved in. The moon being that very quick 28-day cycle that we are all beholden to. And so I wanted it to almost start as a very darkened space. So we, worked with Dennis and Sly to make this very bright foyer space into a darkened location. And I knew that Katie's work, particularly as an installation, was so required upon a kind of reduction of light, that it would only be successful if she was the one in control of what light was entering into that space. And even though we have objects that need, being lit, many of them are themselves lit up, like the screens. We have several screens in this show. Even Lorraine Wibble's installation of the projections upon the fans, which really split the light, requires a kind of concise, precise lighting. And therefore, I think about someone like, Eastman, who had the first, film studio in the country, and it was called the Black Maria Studio, and it was a roof that was covered in tar paper that, the whole trick of it was controlling the light, because in order to, kind of allow us to see that negative, we had to pull back on the lighting. And so it starts off very dark, I think, and there's some very focused objects and imagery, and maybe even more intimate of spaces and viewing spaces that happen in this, is the West Gallery, right? In the West Gallery. And then as you go into the East Gallery, it becomes more immersive of a space. It feels, I hope, overwhelming, and a space that you can really kind of disappear into and feel more visceral, kind of bodily, viscerally affected by the work. And so I think that was the kind of hope, is that people will come from a space of kind of dark reflection and a more personal space to more maybe profound and overwhelming universal space in the East Gallery.
We didn't discuss this at the beginning, but I think it's worth asking about when you enter the show, when you come from the street level space, you encounter 3 aquariums on a base, which is each represents the individual artist in the show.
Yeah.
Maybe just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. There was a lot of talk in because these were all online studio visits with the artists, and us coming together to do something. We did discuss the possibility of having one kind of work that maybe was consistent for all 3 of them, and the iconography of the aquarium is in terms of contemporary art and. Artists like Jeff Koons and Damien Hirst, who have used that language to really kind of speak about masculinity and status and capitalist, endeavors. And these particular artists were interested in using that kind of same iconography or symbolism for very different means. So thinking of the aquarium as a space in which water is supposed to be held and contained, you clean it, you have to keep track of it, the level and the pH, et cetera, for any living creature within those spaces has to be accurate. And it was just a kind of blank canvas for us to start from in order to allow all 3 of them to kind of play around it with their aesthetics. So, Lorraine has a pataphysical landscape, which is a thing that she's interested in investigating in general. She is herself a pataphysicist. She's, interested in the way we romanticize landscapes. And so she's got this fabric and column installation there that really speaks to all of her work throughout the show. I mean, you can see columns in most of the work that she's got here. Katie, the same thing with the choices for materials, these kind of bright, colorful, almost bodily referenced tubes and containers that really are just a playful kind of experimentation of aesthetics. And then Lauren's, which is a hex of Damienhurst. So it's a much more kind of leaning into her own interest in the occult and making spaces for women identifying peoples to really kind of push back against the patriarchal, the icons of the art world, really, and the art market, maybe is what I should clarify in terms of that goes. But yeah, I think it was sort of a fun space to see all three of them come together and really showcase what they do. And it was a way for us to make one kind of site for all of them to collaborate.